Lillian stood by the window, her hands resting on her frame as she watched the sunset. Her mind flashed back to the moment of the past. She remembered how she moved out of Alex's house to start alone in a new city. How she stayed strong during pregnancy, without his help or anyone else's. She remembered how heavy those first few months felt. Pregnant, and completely on her own. She mapped out every exit, calculated every move, built a fortress out of paperwork and silence. While the world thought she was a woman defeated, she was actually a woman becoming. The nights were the hardest. Not because of fear, but because she couldn't afford to lose. One hand would rest on her growing stomach, the other would be flipping through bank statements, new IDs, and lease agreements. "I'm doing this for you," she'd whisper to the dark. And she meant it with every drop of blood in her veins. By the time her clothes started feeling tight, by the time there was no hiding the life growing inside her, she was already gone. She had isolated herself from the world. And when she finally held him, her breath hitched at the memory. That moment was a sacred thing. She remembered how small he was, how he felt like he might break if she squeezed too hard. And yet, he was the thing that finally made her feel unbreakable. Tears rolled from her cheeks. It wasn't the pain of the labor, it was how determined she was. She had chosen this path, and she would walk it until the end. How she managed to keep working hard immediately after giving birth just so she and her baby could survive. How she almost thought she wouldn't make it or give her baby the best life without Alex when her baby cried hard at night. She could still see the look on Alex's face that day. The way his features seemed to slide out of place when he saw the child. The moment the math finally added up in his head that she had a child for him. She closed her eyes and exhaled. He wasn't supposed to find out like that, she muttered to herself, her voice cracking. It wasn't regret that made her voice crack. It was the bone-deep knowledge that for a man like Alexander, the truth was just a starting gun. He wouldn't stop now. Her son stood near the couch, his knuckles white as he gripped the fabric for balance. He was still figuring out how his legs worked, his words still coming out in soft, half-formed shapes. He looked up at her with his bright, wide eyes. Lillian was standing across the room, 2 steps away from him. "You want me to carry you?" she asked, her voice dropping into a soft, melodic hum. He chuckled, reaching his small arms toward her. She pulled him into her chest, tucking his head under her chin. Her hand moved in slow circles over his back. "Someone didn't finish his nap," she whispered into his hair. He mumbled something into her shoulder, then pointed a small finger toward the window. "Light." She managed a faint smile. "Yes. That's the city, baby. It's beautiful. Isn't it?" She sat on the edge of the bed with him in her lap. He stayed busy twisting her fingers around his own, his voice filling the quiet gaps of the apartment with broken stories only he understood. And for a second, everything felt calm. This was the reality she had built. Not the cold marble of the mansion, not the power plays, and definitely not Alex. Her son was tugging at her sleeve. She smiled, kissing his forehead. "I'm here." He leaned into her, and she held him gently. Then there was a knock on the door. She went perfectly still for a few seconds. Then she walked to the door. Her instinct told her it was an unwanted visitor because she wasn't expecting anybody. She checked the monitor by the door and Alex was standing there. She stood over there, watching him on a small screen trying to calm her mind. Then she slowly opened the door. "What do you want?" she asked, staring deep in his eyes. Alex looked at her and his mind softened. She didn't see a strong and powerful man in front of her. What she saw was a wrecked man looking defeated. "I came to fix this," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "There's nothing left to fix." "Alex," she said. "There is. Lillian. There is everything to fix. I was wrong." He pressed on, his voice cracking. Lillian let out a slow, tired breath. "No." Alexander's brow pulled together. "You didn't hear me." "I heard you. And you're still saying no." She met his gaze head on. Yes. His shoulder fell as if the world had crumbled on him. I'm trying to make this right. You can't, she said. Why? Why can we make this work? We're still married, Lillian. She stepped fully into the frame of the door. She didn't yell or look angry. Because it's over. Alex's heart skipped. You don't mean that, he said, his voice low. I do. I meant what I said, Eeks. You're just angry. I'm done. Inside the apartment, a soft sound echoed. Alexander's head snapped toward the sound. Lillian moved instantly, blocking his line of sight with her entire body. I'll be right there, sweetie, she said, her voice turned soft for the child. Alexander let out a long, shaky exhale. I want to see him. No. His face hardened. That's my son. And this is my home. You don't belong here. You don't get to decide that alone. I already did. For a long moment, they both stared into each other's eyes. Then Alex took a step closer. I'll do whatever it takes. Let me just see him, he said. Her eyes stayed hard. That's exactly what I'm afraid of. Please. Alex pleased. Lillian paused for a moment and her eyes flickered. She stared deep into his eyes, then she responded. No. Alex's face hardened and he was filled with determination. I'm not walking away again, he said. She tilted her head. That isn't your choice to make. There was a long silence between them. Then, she finally opened the door wide open and stepped back. 5 minutes, she said. His eyes snapped to hers. And you keep your voice down, you don't want to scare him. Alexander nodded. And for the first time in his life, he became humble stepping into a room. The door clicked shut behind him, and just like that, the air changed. Alexander stood there, an intruder in a world that didn't belong to him. It was quiet, but not the heavy, suffocating silence of his own home. This was different. It was calm, simple, the kind of quiet that felt earned. His eyes roamed the room. No stone-faced guards at the door. No gold-leafed furniture screaming about his net worth. Nothing in this room whispered his name. And yet, it felt more like a home than anything he'd ever owned. Then he saw him. The boy was by the couch, his tiny fingers buried in the fabric as he worked to keep his balance. His movements were small, cautious, the way a person moves when they're still figuring out the gravity of the world. But his eyes, they were sharp. They watched everything. Alexander stopped. For the first time in his life, he didn't know where to put his hands. He didn't know how to take a step. The child looked at him, head tilted, eyes narrowed with a curiosity that wasn't yet tempered by fear. Then, slowly, the boy turned toward the only anchor he knew and was about to cry. Lillian moved before the word even finished hanging in the air. I'm here, she said. She didn't scoop him up, she just stood beside him, letting him take her hand. She was the ground he stood on. Alexander's chest felt like it was being crushed by a physical weight. This is him, he asked. His voice was a rasping shadow of itself. Lillian didn't look up at first. She just watched the way her son's hair caught the light. Yes. Alexander took a step forward, slow and measured, as if he were approaching a wild animal that might bolt if he breathed too loud. The child watched him, eyes wide, then pointed a small, shaky finger. Who? The word was messy, half-formed, but it cut right through Alexander. Lillian's fingers tightened on her son's hand. She paused. Her jaw setting. Someone you don't need to worry about, she said. That hit him. Harder than any insult she could have screamed. Alexander's jaw clenched, but he didn't snap. He didn't push. He just sank. He crouched down, bringing himself down to the child's level. The boy blinked, then took a small step back. Just instinct. Pure and simple. Alexander froze. He kept his hands perfectly still. I won't hurt you, he said, his voice dropping into a low, steady hum. The kid didn't understand the words, but he understood the shift in the room. He stayed where he was, just watching this strange man who looked so much like the reflection in his own mirror. Alexander let out a long, slow breath. He looked up at Lillian. "You really did this," he said. "All of it?" "Yes." There was no pride in it. No anger. Just the flat, undeniable truth. Something cracked in his expression. It wasn't quite regret, but it was a ghost of it. "I should have been there." Lillian didn't soften. Not even an inch. "But you weren't." The child tugged on her hand, breaking the tension. Lillian nodded, her eyes warming for a split second. "In a minute, baby." Then she looked back at Alexander. "Your time is up." He didn't move at first. His gaze dropped back to the boy. Slowly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. A toy. Simple, brand new, still in the box. He didn't try to hand it over. He didn't force the interaction. He just placed it gently on the coffee table and waited. The child's eyes lit up. That was all he needed. He wobbled over, grabbed the box, and hugged it to his chest. Alexander watched every second of it. The way the boy's nose crinkled, the way his hands moved, the life he had missed out on. It was a physical ache now. "You kept him safe," Alexander said. "Yes." "And you kept me out." She met his eyes. "Also yes." There was no more room for conversation. Alexander stood up, his usual composure settling back over him like a suit of armor, but it didn't fit quite right anymore. "I want to be part of his life," he said. "No." The answer was a door slamming shut. "You're not even considering it," he said, his jaw tightening again. "I already have. For a long time." "That isn't fair, Lillian." She actually let out a small, dry laugh. "Fair?" The temperature in the room plummeted. "You humiliated me in front of everyone we knew," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "You made sure I felt like nothing." Alexander stayed quiet. He didn't have a defense. You don't get to vanish when it's convenient, and then play father when you decide it matters. "I didn't know he existed." "And now you do, and it doesn't change a thing." That was it. The breaking point. Something dark and cold settled over Alexander's face. "You think I'll just walk away and accept that?" "I honestly don't care what you accept." The tension was vibrating now, enough that the child looked up, sensing the shift. Lillian noticed immediately. She touched the boy's shoulder, her voice turning to silk. "It's okay, everything's okay." Alexander saw it. The way he was already the villain in this story. He stepped back, piece by piece. The man he used to be taking the wheel again. 5 minutes, she reminded him. He gave a single, sharp nod. But the look in his eyes wasn't defeat. It was a decision. He looked at the child one last time, then at her. "This isn't over." Lillian didn't flinch. "It is for me." He turned, walked to the door, and disappeared into the hall. The second the latch clicked, Lillian let out a breath she'd been holding since he knocked. Her hand went to her chest, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Mama." She turned, a soft smile masking the fear. "I'm here." She picked him up, burying her face in the crook of his neck. She held him like he was the only thing keeping her grounded. But in the back of her mind, she knew. This wasn't the end. It was just the opening move. Across the city, Alexander sat in the back of his car. He was perfectly still. Silent. The driver didn't even dare to check the rearview mirror. "Turn the car around," he said finally. "Sir." "The office. Now." The document arrived just before noon. Lillian almost ignored it. She was seated at her desk, going through contracts, her attention split between work and the soft sounds coming from the other room where her son was playing. It was a normal day. Quiet. Controlled. The kind of stability she had fought too hard to build. Then her assistant knocked lightly and stepped in. "There's a delivery for you." Lillian nodded without looking up. Leave it there. But something in her assistant hesitation made her pause. It's marked urgent, from a legal firm. That was enough. Lillian's hand stilled over the paper she was signing. Slowly, she looked up. Bring it. The envelope was plain, but the weight of it felt anything but. She didn't open it immediately. For a second, she just stared at it, her mind already moving ahead, already preparing. Then she slid her finger under the seal and pulled it open. Her eyes scanned the first line. Then the second. And then she stopped. Full custody. Alexander was requesting full custody of her son. Not visitation. Not shared parenting. Everything. For a moment, the room felt too quiet. Her assistant shifted uneasily. Lillian folded the document slowly, carefully, as if the act itself required control. He's not asking any more, she said quietly. There was no panic in her voice. No anger. Just certainty. He's trying to take him. The days that followed didn't give her time to process anything emotionally. It was meetings, calls, documents, preparation. Every second had to be used. Every detail had to be right. Her lawyer didn't try to soften the situation. He's built a strong argument, he said. He's not coming in weak. Lillian sat across from him, her posture straight, her expression calm. On what grounds? Neglect. That word landed differently. Not loud. But sharp. Her gaze lifted slowly. Explain. He's claiming your work schedule makes you unavailable. That your child is being raised more by hired help than by you. Lillian leaned back slightly. Her first instinct wasn't to argue. It was to think. Because the truth was, she did work long hours. She had built everything from nothing, and that hadn't come with rest or comfort. It came with sacrifice. But neglect. Her jaw tightened just slightly. No, she said quietly. That's not something he gets to rewrite. The courtroom felt colder than usual. Or maybe it was just the tension sitting too heavily in her chest. Lillian sat at her table, her hands resting together, composed on the surface, but inside there was something unfamiliar building. Not fear. But awareness. This wasn't a simple fight anymore. This was something she could actually lose. Across the room, Alexander looked exactly like himself again. Controlled. Sharp. Focused. If there had been any hesitation in him before, it was gone now. This wasn't personal anymore. This was calculated. When the judge called the case, the room fell into a quiet that made every word feel heavier. Alexander's lawyer stood first. Your Honor, while Mrs. Nick has been the primary caregiver, we have evidence to suggest that her professional commitments significantly limit her availability to the child. Lillian didn't move, but her fingers tightened slightly against each other. We will demonstrate that the child is frequently left in the care of others and that the mother's demanding schedule creates inconsistency in both emotional and physical presence. A small murmur moved through the room. Then came the witnesses. The first one hit harder than she expected. Her nanny. Someone she trusted. Someone who had been there through everything. How often is the child under your care? The lawyer asked. The woman hesitated. Just briefly. Most weekdays, she said. And evenings. Sometimes. The lawyer nodded, then pressed further. Would you say Mrs. Nick is frequently absent? This time, the pause was longer. Lillian felt it. That hesitation. That weight. Then, yes. The word echoed louder than anything else that had been said. Lillian kept her expression steady, but inside something shifted. Not because it was completely false, but because of how it sounded. How it would be seen. How it could be used. For the first time since this started, the thought came clearly. She could lose. Alexander took the stand next. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't push emotion. He didn't need to. I can provide stability, he said simply. I have the resources, the time, and the environment to ensure my son is raised with full attention. His eyes flicked toward her briefly. This is not about removing him from his mother, he added. It's about giving him more. It was a clean argument. Logical. Dangerous. Because it sounded right. When it was Lillian's turn, she stood and walked to the stand, each step steady even though her heart wasn't. She sat down, folding her hands together, grounding herself. Is it true that you work long hours? Her lawyer asked. Yes. Is it true that your child is often under someone else's care? She didn't hesitate this time. Yes. There was no point in denying what could be proven. But truth didn't end there. Has your child ever been neglected? Her lawyer asked. Her head lifted. No. Has he ever lacked care, safety, or support? No. Her voice was firmer now. Stronger. Why do you work as hard as you do? He asked. That question settled deeper than the others. For a moment, Lillian didn't speak. Then she exhaled slowly. Because I had nothing, she said. The courtroom went still. I didn't have support. I didn't have a safety net. Everything my son has, I built from the ground up. Her voice didn't shake, but there was something raw in it now. I work so he never has to struggle the way I did. A pause. Then softer. But I am there. Every night. Every time he needs me. Every time he calls for me. There was no performance in her words. No exaggeration. Just truth. The silence that followed felt different. Less sharp. More thoughtful. When the judge finally spoke, the room seemed to hold its breath. Mr. Nick, he began, your concern for involvement is valid. Alexander straightened slightly. But this court does not find sufficient evidence of neglect. Lillian's breath caught in her chest. Primary custody will remain with the mother. She didn't move. Didn't react immediately. Your request for full custody is denied. The words settled slowly, like something heavy being lifted. But not entirely gone. Visitation will continue under structured conditions, the judge added. Further evaluation may be conducted. The gavel struck. And just like that, it was over. Outside the courtroom, the air felt different. Not peaceful, but lighter. Enough to breathe. Alexander caught up to her before she reached the exit. You almost lost, he said. She turned to him slowly. Her expression was calm again. But something in her eyes had changed. I didn't, she replied. His jaw tightened. You can't keep doing this, he said. Working like that. Don't, she cut in. One word. Sharp. Controlled. You don't get to question how I raised him when you weren't there. Silence stretched between them. Then she stepped closer. Not aggressively, but with intention. You tried to take him from me, she said quietly. That wasn't anger. That was something deeper. Final. Alexander didn't respond. Not because he didn't have words, but because none of them would matter. That night, Lillian sat alone in her office. The court papers were still on her desk. She stared at them for a long time. The lines. The arguments. The outcome. She had won. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like clarity. Because now she knew something for certain. He wouldn't stop. Not halfway. Not ever. Unless she ended it completely. Her gaze shifted to another document on the table. Divorce papers. They had been prepared. Waiting. But now there was no hesitation. She picked them up, her hand steady. You chose this, she whispered softly. And then she signed. Across the city, Alexander stood by his window when his phone buzzed. He picked it up without thinking. Read the message. And went still. Divorce filed. For a long moment, he didn't move. Didn't react. Then his grip tightened slowly around the phone. His reflection stared back at him in the glass. Darker now. Colder. Lillian. His voice dropped, low and controlled. This isn't how this ends. But for the first time, there was something uncertain beneath it. Something he couldn't control. And that was new. Alexander didn't sleep that night. He stood by the window in his office long after the city had gone quiet, his reflection staring back at him like someone he barely recognized. The reports on his desk remained untouched. The calls he ignored kept piling up. None of it mattered. Not the business. Not the power. Not even the damage she had already started to do. All he could see was that moment. The look on his son's face. Fear. Because of him. His jaw tightened. That wasn't supposed to happen. He had walked into that apartment thinking he was taking back what was his. Instead, he had walked out as a stranger his own child didn't trust. And now she had filed for divorce. Final. Public. Irreversible. Alexander dragged a hand down his face slowly. For the first time in years, something felt out of control. But that feeling didn't last. It never did. Because men like him didn't sit in loss. They responded. By morning, the war had a new shape. It wasn't emotional anymore. It wasn't impulsive. It was calculated. Lillian felt it before she saw it. The shift. The pressure. The way things around her began to tighten again, but differently this time. Cleaner. More precise. Her assistant walked into her office with a stack of documents and a worried expression. They've escalated. Lillian didn't look up immediately. She finished signing the document in front of her, then set her pen down with deliberate calm. How? Multiple injunctions. Financial reviews. They're digging into everything. Tax filings, partnerships, offshore accounts, all of it. Lillian leaned back slightly. Of course he was. If he couldn't take her child, he would come for the one thing she built with her own hands. Her company. Her independence. Her stability. He wasn't trying to win anymore. He was trying to break her. Across the city, Alexander sat at the head of a long conference table, his legal team surrounding him. This ends one way, he said quietly. She folds. One of his lawyers hesitated. Sir, she's not reacting the way we expected. His eyes lifted slowly. What does that mean? She's not panicking. She's restructuring. A pause. She's protecting her assets faster than we can pressure them. That made something flicker in his expression. Not doubt. Recognition. Back in her office, Lillian stood by the window, her phone pressed lightly against her ear. No delays, she said calmly. Move everything we discussed. A pause as she listened. Yes. All of it. She ended the call and placed the phone down. Her assistant watched her carefully. Are we fighting this or? We're not fighting, Lillian said. She turned slowly, her eyes steady. We're finishing it. The next few weeks became a silent war. No shouting. No public drama. Just moves. Calculated. Strategic. Precise. Every time Alexander blocked one deal, Lillian had already secured another. Every time he pushed pressure through one channel, she redirected through two others. He expected resistance. He didn't expect control. Why isn't she breaking? One of his men asked carefully. Alexander didn't answer immediately. Because he was starting to understand something he hadn't before. She wasn't surviving anymore. She had already rebuilt herself. Then came the final blow. Not from him. From her. Alexander was in his office when the notice came in. His assistant walked in, unusually tense. Sir, you need to see this. He took the file without a word, opening it. At first, his expression didn't change. Then, slowly, it did. Legal action. Not defensive. Offensive. Detailed records of financial interference. Shell companies traced. Transactions exposed. Every move he made against her. Documented. Organized. Presented. His grip tightened slightly around the paper. "She's filing this?" he asked quietly. "Yes, sir." For the first time since this started, Alexander felt it. Not anger. Not control. Respect. Because this wasn't luck. This wasn't survival. This was strategy. And she had outplayed him. The courtroom was quieter this time. No spectacle. No crowd. Just finality. Lillian stood at her table, composed as ever, her expression unreadable. Across from her, Alexander sat in silence. No anger. No outburst. Just stillness. The judge reviewed the documents carefully, flipping through pages that detailed everything: interference, manipulation, financial pressure. A long pause filled the room. Then, "Mr. Nick," the judge said, his tone firm, "these actions are not only inappropriate during an active custody dispute, they are legally actionable." Alexander didn't respond. Didn't argue. Didn't deny. Because he couldn't. Given the evidence presented, the judge continued, "The court rules in favor of Mrs. Nick regarding her claims. Additionally, the divorce filing will proceed without delay." The words settled heavily. Final. Unavoidable. Lillian didn't react immediately. She simply stood there, steady, grounded. "Custody remains with the mother," the judge added. "Visitation rights will continue under supervision until further evaluation." The gavel struck. And just like that, it was done. Outside the courtroom, the air felt different. Lighter. But sharper. Alexander stepped out a few moments after her. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then, "You planned all of this?" Lillian turned slowly. "No," she said. "I prepared for you." He held her gaze. Longer this time. Deeper. "You've changed." A small pause. "So have you," she replied. Silence stretched between them. Not hostile. Not soft. Just real. "I never wanted it to end like this," he said finally. Lillian's expression didn't shift. "But you made sure it did." There was no anger in her voice. No bitterness. Just truth. He exhaled slowly, nodding once. As if accepting something he couldn't change. Then he stepped back. Not forward. Not closer. Back. And for the first time, he didn't try to stop her from leaving. That evening, Lillian sat in her apartment, her son asleep in her arms. The room was quiet. Peaceful. The kind of quiet she had fought for. Her fingers moved gently over his back, her gaze softening as she watched him breathe. Everything she had done. Every fight. Every decision. Every sacrifice. It had led here. To this moment. To stability. To safety. To him. "I told you," she whispered softly, pressing a kiss to his head. "I would choose you." And she did. Every time. Across the city, Alexander stood alone in his office again. The same window. The same view. But everything felt different. The divorce was real now. Final. Signed. He had lost the woman he thought would never leave. And the life he assumed would always wait for him. But this time, he didn't reach for control. Didn't make a call. Didn't plan his next move. He just stood there. Quiet. Still. And for the first time in a long time, he let the silence stay. Because deep down, he understood something now. This wasn't a battle he could win anymore. And maybe, that was the point.